Like and subscribe right now, or else this will be in your bed tonight. r/AskReddit by Planet Reddit. What did your parents allow you to do as a kid that your friends were not allowed to do and you now realize was bad parenting by your parents? My dad let us ride on the roof of the car, amongst other things. He probably wasn't winning any parenting awards, but I thought he was the coolest. I think this is the best, or worst, response in this thread. Holy crap. We had a Volvo station wagon and dad let us ride up there holding onto the luggage rack. And now he flips his shit if my kids are not buckled into car seats before we start the engine. This is both cool and stupid at the same time. My parents moved out and left me to live in the house when I was 16. We had exactly one conversation about it, whereby they asked if I wanted to move to another state with them and I said no. It was cool. I was never into drugs or alcohol or parties, so I didn't ruin the house. I wasn't allowed to heat the house up much, so I always wore a snow jacket inside, and basically just came home to sleep. But now that I'm older, I realize that it's more on the line of child abandonment. Oh well. There was a kid I went to school with who was emancipated. Both his parents had split and he had no other family to take him in. And he refused to be a foster kid. They tried rehoming him after the 20th time he ran away and they found him at his parents' house. They eventually just let him stay. One of our teachers at school would check in on him and kind of do the dad thing. He helped him get a check every month from the state to live off of. Taught him how to cook, clean, mow the yard, pay bills and shit. That's a lot to put on a 14-year-old kid. How the duck they even let that happen is beyond me, but he still lives there to this day. Only he has a real job and a wife. Nice ending at least. Something I can relate to. My mum works a few hours away and only comes home every couple of weeks. This started when I was 16. And luckily I've been able to drive myself places, but it still sucks when you go to events and everyone else has parents there and you don't. What I am glad about, however, is that it has taught me to be independent and will definitely not have any issue with moving out and changing towns very soon. Whereas my brother and sister that live with my dad and stepmom are too dependent on their parents. They're 17 and have never cooked a meal themselves or had control over money or anything that will help them later on. They let me date a 19-year-old when I was 13 and we always hung out with his creepy 20-something friends who tried taking advantage of me several times. I thought I was so grown, but looking back I'm horrified. This is the first one in the thread other than one about cigarettes that I'm like, okay duck, now that's a terrible parenting. Parents did the same with me at that age and a 30-year-old. That story is a really bad one. Edit. Well shit. My typo is going to leave most of you disappointed. I meant to type 20. Duck, I think my mom was around 30 when I was 13, lol. Same shitty situation though, I'm sure. He was manipulative and physically mentally abusive. To make a long ducked up story short, part of his manipulation was he tampered with my birth control, and along with it convinced me that I was trash and no one else would ever want me. I had 3 kids from him by the time I was 19. Moved out of my parents' home at 15 when I found out I was pregnant with the first. When I got pregnant with the third, he confessed his BC tampering and I left him. For good. He has nothing to do with the kids. They knew about it and didn't stop it. My mom used to buy me cigarettes when I was a teenager. I thought it was cool. Now that I'm a parent, I'm like, duck. This is how I feel about parents that buy their kids alcohol. As a teenager it was so cool. Sweet. Timmy, where do you get that handle of whiskey? Your mom. Awesome. Now I'm like, what the duck? What kind of responsible parent does that? A beer/glass of wine at dinner is one thing. My parents did that and I didn't think it was crazy. But buying and giving your teen a shit ton of hard liquor and letting them drive off with it on a Friday night. Shit. Be a good parent and make them get it from an older sibling like everyone else. Shit. Be a good parent and make them get it from an older sibling like everyone else. As an older sibling, I feel now that you're old enough, they are too. Because it wouldn't be fair otherwise. Rage button getting pressed. I'm 2 years older than my brother and a good child. I went off to college with no issues. I gave my parents a once a week 10 minutes call and had no issues. My little brother goes off to college and suddenly I have a curfew when I'm home. My parents make me call them at midnight Friday and Saturday nights to ensure I'm at my apartment, and my girlfriend got calls asking where I was. We went to different schools. They weren't paying for my school, so I eventually just stopped. Caused a huge rift with my parents that wasn't solved until my lil bro got expelled for bringing meth and a gun into the dorms, and they got a divorce. Eat as many sweets as I wanted to. Eat as much McDonald's as I wanted to. Skip brushing my teeth at night. I am now 21 and I had lots of problems with my teeth and digestive system. I managed to fix them all up in my teens, and now I am strict with myself. Just a shit ton of sugary snacks. Holy shit, I ate so much sugar as a kid. My mom still buys me packs of cookies and chocolate when I go home. I'm 25 now. I'm such a chocolate fiend now, which I'm sure is related to the loads of sugar snacks. Mind you, I wouldn't change it. Stay home from school if I wanted to. My parents worked weekends, so sometimes they'd ask me whether I felt like going to school or not on a day they had off during the week, and then we'd go hiking or to a museum. That was elementary school. I was a pretty good kid, so as I got older my parents trusted me when I told them I didn't feel well, and they'd let me stay home. That's nice actually. My mom did similar. She had off Mondays and Tuesdays, so sometimes I'd skip and we'd hang out together. Especially if she had gotten season passes to Six Flags and felt like we hadn't gone enough times yet that year to make it worth it. After I made it to about 10 and was fine home alone for a few hours, she'd let me take a mental health day as long as I didn't have any test that day and nothing due. I mean, not bad parenting as such, but my dad left when I was 6 and so was an uncle dad after that. My mum brought my sister and I up and was very soft. So until she died when I was 14, I was still getting away with sleeping in her bed when she hadn't the heart to put me back when I was sneaking in as a toddler. So when she died, you can imagine what my grandmother had to deal with. Not only 2 grieving teenagers in the heights of hormone possession, but 2 grieving teenagers who hadn't been bed trained and so cried at night being left alone. That sounds really tough. I'm sorry you had to deal with all of that. I hope your grandma was able to provide some support. Therapy can be helpful in so many situations, no matter how long ago that happened. I had a single mom that died when I was a teenager. 2. Therapy was very helpful. Internet hug. Got my first pair of 4-inch heels at 11 years old, maybe just turned 12. Shiny black patent mules. I mean, I begged for those shoes, but as an adult, wouldn't that seem kind of uncomfortable? Yeah, but in my 12-year-old mind it was worth it to look over 5 feet tall. Edit to add. By 15 I'd worn high heels so much that my tendons shortened and it was painful to walk in flat shoes or even bare feet. Thankfully I am no longer an idiot and have accepted my short-assedness. My boss is like this. She's an older lady and has always worn heels and now physically can't wear flats. One of my co-workers saw her mowing her lawn in her heels, and she even has rain boots with heels. Yeah, you can go ahead and sleep 3 days of the week at your friend's house. Like, in a row? I feel like that would just get boring after a while. Not if your friend was richer than you were, or the opposite gender. Let me go off into the forest outside my house. 1,500 acre place with virtually nothing except trees inside, alone. During the summer I'd spend up to 2 weeks at a time in there. Even had a small village of mud huts and wooden sheds at one point. So you're the primitive technology guy? No, he didn't say thank you at the end of his comment. Couldn't be him. That actually just sounds really cool, not necessarily bad parenting. I mean, maybe they should kept a better eye on you, but you weren't out shooting up or robbing people, so they probably just let you have some fun and freedom. Let me watch whatever violent scary movie, but any kind of nudity and they would cover my eyes. I was so traumatized by those scary movies. I think I could have handled boobs just fine. Same here. Blood and gore were fine, but cover your eyes while I fast forward through this sex scene. That's the American way. Yep, how come 8-year-old me was allowed to watch The Shining but teenage me was too young for Brokeback Mountain? What I don't understand is that I watched scary movies all throughout my childhood, and now that I'm an adult I have to cover my eyes if there is even a commercial for a scary movie. I can't handle them at all now. I don't just get jumping at the scary scenes and maybe having trouble sleeping scared, but I will cry tears and be afraid to be alone in broad daylight. Put my shotgun across my bike handlebars and ride out the dove hunt. It was the 60s. Cops and no one paid much attention. I was in high school in the 1980s and I lived in a small, rural town. It was not uncommon to see people with rifles hanging in gun racks and their trucks parked in the school parking lot. When it was hunting season, kids would bring their rifles to school and check them in at the office in the morning. You would walk up to the office and see 30 rifles all leaning up against the wall waiting for kids to pick them up after school so they could go hunting. Times were very different. I brought my shotgun to school after deer hunting in 2005. It still exists in small town America. A lot has changed since 2005. My mother used to smoke pot inside her boyfriend's car with the windows rolled up. My brother, sister and myself inside with her. I was 10. Then she'd bring him home and duck him loudly while we were upstairs and awake. That was one of several boyfriends. Does this qualify? Deleted 0.5218. What is this? She offered to duck me when I was 11 or 12. I told this to my dad and he told me my dong would probably fall off if I took her up on it, and that it would be much better if I waited for somebody I loved. Ha 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 ha, go dad. Join our community Discord, link in description. Not bad parenting exactly. When my mom left my dad, we moved to a nice city and lived in a nice neighborhood. She worked all the time and came home only wanting food and sleep, despite being strict and cautious of people. By the time I was 16, she was too tired to really implement any of her rules. I was able to stay out late and do pretty much whatever I wanted. Surprisingly, I never did drugs, booze or sex. I just went out to the city life, walked around and observed people. I was such a boring kid. It's not until years later when I'm recalling my teen years that I realized all the missed opportunities I could have had. So sad. I think many kids that have a lot of freedom are actually pretty reasonable. When something is allowed, it's not as much fun because it's not forbidden. So all the excitement is gone. It doesn't work like that for everyone, of course. Honestly, it's because as a parent you can look back and think about all the insane shit you could do. Yet in reality most young adults are just as plain and boring as you are as an adult. Sure, there are some thrill seekers, but shitty or great parenting may not weed that out of them anyway. The best thing you can do as a parent is hopefully instill in them that sense of right and wrong, what is and isn't real, and a bit of how to self-moderate. The rest is keeping them fed and housed. Voila. Tell me about it. I got my own car at 17. Aunt bought a new car and decided to give me her hand-me-down. It was older than I was, but it drove me places, so I was fine with it, and didn't have a curfew after age 16. Mainly because my parents didn't care. I didn't have my first alcoholic drink until I was 23, and have never done drugs. My car driving, curfew-free, crazy teen years was spent getting ice cream at 3 AM and playing Magic the Gathering. Never bothered about me. Riding my bike alone to the other end of town, wandering through the woods alone. Sure, all good. I can't count the number of times I'd come in after being gone for several hours and they never even asked where I'd been. This was the 90s, not the early 60s or anything. After I learned to drive and bought a car as a teenager, I'd be gone a full day, again. Didn't even bother asking where I'd been. At the time it was cool. Now I question why they didn't care where their 17-year-old daughter was going for hours and hours on weekends and vacations. My parents were kind of the same towards me, but I'm a male. My sister on the other hand, they always asked where she was and what she was doing, and she had to check in every hour. That was my parents with me. I still resent my parents for not giving me even close to the same amount of freedom as my brothers. I don't think this was bad parenting, but my mother did. My father used to take me to the bar with him when I was maybe 6 or 7, just a little sprat in pigtails at the time, and he would buy me a pack of M&Ms and a Coke. He'd buy a beer and sit smoking cigarettes and chatting with his friends, while providing me with boundless quarters to play Gallagher. I had to balance on this slightly ripped and rickety red vinyl brass stool to play it, but even being scratched by the frayed nylon was just part of the experience. Sometimes dad would join me, and we'd play a co-op round or two. I still remember those as some of the best times of my childhood. Sitting there tripping on arcade Gallagher and sugar, smelling the heady bar smell of cigarette smoke and stale beer, and my dad laughing and telling jokes with the other men behind me. He was the best parent anyone could ever ask for. That doesn't sound so bad honestly. Probably a bit late to this, but my dad wasn't a bad parent, but he was chilled out. One day while sitting down to watch a film with my then youngish brother, can't remember exact age, my dad chooses Stephen King's IT. My brother thought it looked scary, but my dad, wanting to watch it, said, "Don't worry, it's funny. See, it's got clowns." My brother still has a fear of clowns. A fear of clowns is perfectly natural. IT merely exacerbates it. Not my parents, but my grandparents for this one. My favorite toys as a kid were screwdrivers. I'd go through my grandparents' house and get them all together and play with them. My grandpa would even help me get as many as I could in the garage and basement. I had all kinds of screwdrivers. One day, my aunt came to my grandparents' house while I was there, and I ran up to her with 2 screwdrivers in my hand, held them up and sang, "My mom doesn't want me to play with these, but grandpa lets me." That was the end of screwdrivers at grandpa and grandma's. Also, my grandpa would let me eat hot dogs cold, like, right out of the package. Your grandpa was probably thinking, shit, if they can send me to Nam with grenades and guns at 16, then my grandson can play with screwdrivers at 8 inches. He was actually in World War II, but that was definitely the inspiration for letting me play with shit like that. If I can storm Normandy with K rations, you can eat hot dogs out of the box. My younger brother and I were allowed to smash things apart and or set things on fire in the backyard as long as our parents confirmed that the thing in question was no longer needed, already not working, unfixable, that we cleaned up everything afterwards, and that there was water nearby in case the fire got too crazy. It never did. We burned and busted so many old electronics, toys, furniture, you name it. We were also allowed to use pocket knives and taught how to strike matches at a very young age. 5-6 years old. We never got hurt and never burned the house down. This was the early 80s. These days I know adults that are afraid to light a fire in a fireplace. Man, I bet you really don't want to know what kind of toxic fumes were coming off the electronics y'all were burning. My mother bought me a bong for my 16th birthday. We went to the Electric Fetus so I could pick out the one I wanted. For some reason Electric Fetus made me think the store sold sex toys. Haha whoosh. When I was 9 or 10 years old at the cottage, a few of our parents would give us a couple extra tanks of gas and send us out in our fleet of little 8 and 9.9 HP tin boats for the day to explore wherever we wanted. Be back before it gets dark and stick together were the only rules. For context, our lake has 17,000 islands on it, crosses the US-Canada border, and is 70 miles long and wide. We had charts. We knew how to read them and find where we were, and hopefully home. And we knew when to slow down because we weren't familiar with the water. We always made it home. But when I hear about kids getting apprehended by child services for playing unattended in their own yards, all I can think is that sucks for society. We all learned so much. Most importantly, to trust our own abilities. Where do you get that now? Edit. Lake of the Woods, Ontario, would be Canada's longest shoreline if some of it wasn't in the US. Lake of the Woods? You got it. And we weren't special. If you know the area, you probably have the same story. Put off my homework until the morning. I smoked weed with my dad for the first time when I was 15, after smoking with my siblings since I was 14. At the time I thought it was so cool. Now I'm like, who the duck does that? My mom ran a restaurant and worked 16-18 hour days. My dad worked on ships so they weren't around much, and when they were, tried to be cool, I guess. They also left me in charge of the grocery money and shopping when I was like 11 when my mom opened the restaurant. They knew my siblings, 13 and 17, would spend it on weed or just bullshit. So it became my job to do the shopping and cooking for my siblings and I, though my siblings were basically never home. I complained that I was lonely, so my folks got me a dog. At the time, it felt cool to have responsibility and be trusted. As a grown-up with a child of my own, that shit keeps me up at night imagining my own daughter in that position. ride in the car without a seatbelt, ride in the back of a cargo van that didn't even have seats, sometimes standing up, play with my grandpa's power tools, put rocks in a vise and then whack them with a hammer until they cracked, without eye protection, use the internet completely unsupervised and unrestricted at age 10, call people I met while using the internet completely unsupervised, stay out as late as I wanted in high school, hang out with men who were in their 20s when I was 14. My dad would get in the mood for something from the corner store, but didn't feel like moving, and by corner store, I'm referring to a convenience store that was about a mile up the road from my parents' house, so he'd toss me the keys to his truck, at age 13, and send me on the mission to retrieve goodies. Small town. So I'd have many kids I went to school with see me tooling around in my dad's big ass F350. I had such a hard time maintaining a view over the steering wheel while also trying to keep my feet on the pedals and shift the 5-speed manual. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for 3 videos a day.